All praise to the Most High. All praises to the Most High. Tonight, we just coming to you late night tonight, and we want you to just tune in with us tonight. And we're going to do something a little different tonight. So, we want you to get into reading with me tonight. So, Father, we thank you in the name of Yeshua that you would bless us tonight, that we would be able to reflect and understand and get understanding from every source. Here a little, there a little. In the name of Yeshua, Amen. All right. Those of you who are watching by way of YouTube, I always want to ask you to hit the subscribe button and um, follow us on other platforms that you see that we're on. Okay, and I'm thankful that you are with us on tonight. And let's see if we can look at a few things here tonight. Let me see here. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do tonight, we're going to just read a little bit, and let me see if I can go ahead and share my screen again. Okay. And I don't expect anybody to be up, but if you're watching tonight, listen. Just give it a top opportunity to listen to on what we have on tonight. Okay. All right. So let's see if we can get so you can. We're going to read it tonight. We're going to jump into this book right here called White Fear by Roland Martin. White Fear by Roland Martin. How the Browning of America is making white folks lose their mind. That's what we're going to read. That's what I've been reading. So I want to share that with you all tonight.
Reimagines the CIA trying to get the mafia.
Let's see if we can start that over.
Chapter 6, The Audacity of Obama.
Okay, let's see. I think that I'm in chapter 6. So what we're going to do, we're going to go back to chapter 1. Okay. We're going to go back to chapter 1.
This is Audible.
Audible Studios presents White Fear, How the Browning of America is Making White Folks Lose Their Minds. Written and performed by Roland S. Martin.
Introduction. By 2043, no ethnic group will be the majority in America. 2/3 of the world's countries are already composed of a majority of people of color, and sooner than we know it, America will be just like the rest of the world. In fact, a 2018 Pew Research study showed that almost half, 49% of post-millennials ages 6 to 21 are Hispanic, African American, and Asian. By 2043, these growth trends among people of color will continue, and it is expected that less than 47% of the country will be white Americans. The political impact of these numbers can already be seen in the high turnout of millennials and post-millennials in the 2018 midterm elections. According to Axios, an estimated 31% of 18 to 29-year-olds voted, which was the highest voter turnout for that age group since 1994. These rapidly changing demographics will have a profound impact in the next 2 decades for our elections, government policies, economic growth, and a whole lot more. Does this scare you? The answer to that question might just depend on the color of your skin. White supremacy has been at the foundation of this country's infrastructure since the first enslaved Africans arrived on the shores of Jamestown, Virginia in 1619, and it continues to have a lasting impact in this country. Racial division has defined America, and race continues to dominate the American psyche like no other. In fact, race is so embedded in the DNA of America that most of us are unaware of how deeply it affects how we live, move, and breathe. While the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, the Civil Rights Acts of 1866 and 1964, the Voting Rights Acts of 1965, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968 provided necessary legislation and policy to give African Americans basic civil rights, these policies did not address the underlying fundamental problem of why we needed to create legislation to address these issues in the first place. White fear. Why is it so important to understand white fear? Without a proper understanding of this pulsating insanity and the history behind it, we will continue to be blindsided every time white fear inevitably rears its head. I define white fear as the unwillingness to share power and resources and allow for the redefinition of America's morals, values, and principles. White fear is perpetuated by white Americans who are resistant to allowing America to live up to the promises of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. When I interviewed anti-racism educator Jane Elliott on my show, Roland Martin Unfiltered, in 2019, she summed up white fear brilliantly. Quote, "The problem with white people is not white innocence, nor is it white privilege. The problem is white ignorance. And until we get educated to the fact that we are not superior just because we have a lack of melanin in our skin, that's how long we will have this problem. No one is responsible for the past. We are all responsible for the present and the future that we're creating for ourselves and our children," unquote. Recognizing white fear isn't just about pointing out overt symbols of hooded Klan members and burning crosses. It's about calling out voter suppression laws, gerrymandering, redlining, predatory loans, underfunded school systems, gentrification, police brutality, and any other practices that prevent people of color from taking equal part in the American dream. Without appropriately addressing white fear, we aren't doing anything more than spraying air freshener in a room filled with dog shit. When we don't address white fear, American classrooms will continue to be even more segregated than they were before Brown versus Board of Education. When we ignore white fear, people of color will continue to be redlined into poor, underserved neighborhoods and gentrified out of communities where they have lived and built family legacies for generations. When we are lulled into the false notion that white fear has been erased by the election of the nation's first African-American president, he is replaced by a white supremacist who has done more to enforce the racial divide than any American leader in more than 30 years. This book is a call for white Americans to take a hard look in the mirror and begin dealing with their own internal racial conflicts. It is designed to be a conversation piece for white Americans to start the necessary reprogramming of their thoughts, assumptions, and beliefs about this country, especially as it relates to race. It also sounds the alarm for white Americans to understand that the demographics and cultural norms of America are changing, regardless of whether they are ready or not. Therefore, white Americans either need to face their bigotry and shift into the reality of a swiftly changing America, or be locked out of the reality of the new American dream. White fear is also a call to action for people of color to begin recognizing and stepping into new opportunities in entrepreneurship, corporate development, local and national leadership, and economic empowerment as the dynamics of power begin to shift in this country. Recognizing the debilitating, demoralizing, and damaging effects of white supremacy is just the first step. White fear will be a necessary tool for people of color to begin building their resources, developing their skill sets, and appropriately strategizing their move to dismantle white supremacy and usher in the America that they deserve. This book also presents my unapologetic take on what is happening today. From Black Lives Matter to challenging corporate media on their racial blind spots to fighting voter suppression, I have never shied away from speaking truth to power and telling it like it is. I make it perfectly clear throughout this book that this racial divide will not end with Donald Trump. We're in the midst of a racial war that will define what kind of nation we have for the next generation. White fear is about connecting the puzzle pieces about the pervasive nature of white fear and educating people about the inevitable escalation of violence and tension that will continue as the demographics of this country swiftly change from majority white to a majority of Black, Latino, and Asian Americans. We have to begin preparing the next generation for this change. The prevalence of white fear will cause the political and economic landscape of America to get a whole lot worse before it gets any better. Finally, white fear will identify these separate puzzle pieces from Trump's rise to the U.S. presidency to the decline of white American optimism to the diminishing blue-collar workforce and create the larger picture of what will unfold in America over the next 2 decades. White fear is a significant issue in our country, and we have to prepare ourselves for it. This is why white fear matters and why it matters right now. Section 1, igniting the flame of white fear. White fear is always a fire waiting to start. Let's take a look at a few of the things that ignite the fire of white fear, including politicians, past and present, the media, and other talking heads, gerrymandering, coded rhetoric, and even the minimizing of an insurrection. Chapter 1, the kindling for white fear. While working as a contributor for CNN right after Barack Obama's first election, I had a conversation with my colleague John Avlon, author of the 2010 book, Wingnuts: How the Lunatic Fringe is Hijacking America. We were discussing the premise of his book, and I said, quote, "John, we're living in the beginning of white minority resistance." John said, "How so?" I then shared with him a recent poll that was released near the inauguration of the nation's first Black president, Barack Hussein Obama. The basic question was whether Americans were optimistic about the future of America. What stood out to me was that a majority of every ethnic group, Blacks, Latinos, and Asians, said they were optimistic about the future. Yet white Americans were the only group that fell below a majority. That simple question raised a host of issues for me. And despite all of the proclamations of a so-called post-racial America, which I knew was utter bullshit, I knew that there would be a fierce response from white America to the emergence of this Black man in the White House. In fact, within hours of Obama's last inaugural ball, then Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell made it clear that his primary goal was to make Barack Obama a one-term president. Many may say that that was just a typical Republican response to a Democrat in office, but it cut even deeper as soon as he began to lead. In Obama's first term, the Tea Party came to prominence. While its adherents would say they were merely individuals who were upset with billionaires and Wall Street being bailed out, their anger and righteous indignation served as a supple home to extremist voices. Some folks claimed that Obama would introduce white slavery. They spewed xenophobic and racist remarks, and they continued circulating the idea of birtherism, otherwise known as the total falsehood that Obama was not born in the United States. The election of President Obama woke up white America to the reality that the country was headed in a new direction, and this change was not going to go down easy. But of course, Mitch McConnell's agenda and the rise of the Tea Party were nothing new. In fact, America has a long history of aggrieved white people being angry with any initiatives that helped Black people. Abraham Lincoln had not even been elected president when forces in the South began to suggest that if he was elected and dared to free the slaves, there would be civil war in America. And that is exactly what happened. It wasn't a battle over states' rights or some other silly rationale provided by lovers of the Confederacy. It was about freedom for Black people. Once the war ended, radical Republicans continued their march for Black freedom, passing the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, what became known as the Reconstruction Amendments. These were not passed in a bipartisan manner. While Democrats tried to stop them, the Republicans moved full force ahead. Yet as the Reconstruction period progressed, white Americans began to get tired of the legislative efforts to help freed slaves. Not even a week after the Civil War ended, Lincoln was assassinated and Southerner Andrew Johnson became president, making his racist views clear, which served as fuel for the forces who desired to keep Blacks from succeeding. Tensions ramped up considerably with the contested election of 1876 and the eventual compromise of 1877, in which Southerners agreed to Rutherford B. Hayes becoming president as long as federal troops were removed from the last 3 remaining Southern state capitals. That federal occupation had provided protection to freed slaves who saw rapid advancement and election to office. Once the compromise was agreed to, Southern Democrats picked up their reign of terror, leading to 88 years of Jim Crow. Not only did the resistance to Black advancement pick up considerably in Southern states, even the white supremacist Supreme Court played a role, declaring the Civil Rights Act of 1875 unconstitutional, determining that Congress did not have the power to outlaw discrimination. There would not be another Civil Rights Act in America until 1957. Then, in 1890, the War on Black Advancement continued in Mississippi, where white supremacists held a constitutional convention to stop the political advancement of Blacks. In the days after Reconstruction, Blacks were elected all across the South and especially in Mississippi. After years of Black leaders coming into legislative power throughout the state, members of the Mississippi State Legislature cried out, "There are too many Blacks being elected. We have to end this now." They changed their state constitution to limit Black voting rights and made it harder for Black candidates to run for office. Since 1890, not a single African American has been elected to statewide office in Mississippi. And white fear didn't stop in Mississippi. It traveled up the coast to Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898, when a group of white supremacists staged an insurrection to overthrow a group of rightfully elected white and Black leaders who sought to bring equality to the city. We saw it again with the destruction and massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921, and again at the doors of Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1957, and again with the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. on April 4th, 1968, and again with the violent implosions for mandatory busing and school integration in the 1970s, and again with the crime bill passed by President Bill Clinton in 1994, and again with the Shelby County v. Holder verdict in 2013, which gutted major provisions to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And again with the election of Donald J. Trump on November 9th, 2016. And again with the Capitol insurrection on January 6th, 2021. And again, and again, and again. What we have seen in American history is that Black success is always followed by white backlash. Whether triggered by the fear of Blacks in positions of power or the fear that Black folks would take white Americans' jobs, this backlash has been the consistent pattern in this country. These mere highlights of ignited white fear from history are just the tip of the iceberg of what happens when white American power is threatened by Black people and other people of color asserting their rights to have access to what they deserve. January 6, 2021 marked almost 12 years to the day that I made that declaration to John Avlon about the oncoming onslaught of white minority resistance. When people asked me, "Roland, what was your reaction to what took place on January 6th? I said, I smiled. Why? Because America finally got to see what we as African Americans have always seen and predicted. White folks lose their minds due to Black success. Oh, you think I'm wrong? What were the 4 American cities Donald Trump kept citing as his proof of a rigged election? Atlanta, Philadelphia, Detroit, and Milwaukee. What are those often called? Black cities. He paid for a partial recount of votes in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee. America could not escape the reality of white fear led by a racist president who fueled racist rhetoric that propelled other white Americans to attempt to overthrow the U.S. government. While mainstream media ignored this oncoming insurrection for years, anyone with a functional grasp of American history could have accurately predicted that as soon as white power is threatened, the violent effects of white fear are never far behind. Chapter 2, Enter Donald Trump.
Okay, now we're going to stop right there, and we're going to end our video on tonight. And I hope you enjoyed the chapter 1. That's all I basically can do, because I don't know if there's any copyright infringements or anything like that. So I encourage you to go to this to Audible. You can buy the book on Amazon, White Fear by Roland Martin. You go to rolandmartin.com. I do not get paid for any of this advertisement or anything like that. So I'm not even advertising. I'm just getting into this book, and I just wanted to show you that. So all right, have a great night and shalom.